Hi, TR-1000 is the new flagship drum machine from Roland. And in a surprising move for them, it has physical analog circuits based on their classic 808 and 909 drum machines. But it's not a reissue. It's got plenty of digital drum synth models the Roland is known for and more. It's got modern sampling, slicing, and sequencing. And as you can see, plenty of hands-on controls. In this video, I'll take an in-depth look at everything it's got, both the modern digital features and the sounds of its analog circuits. This, for example, is a kit based on the 808, and this one on the 909. I'll also take a look at its pros and cons compared to the competition. And at the end, I'll play you all its factory patterns. Before I start, a quick disclosure. Roland sent me the TR-1000. Other than that, no money changed hands. They have no say over the content of this video and don't get to see it before it's published. Okay, let's start with an overview. TR-1000 is a 14-voice drum machine. It has 10 main tracks, but each of the first 4 dual-layer tracks can trigger 2 different voices, either together in layers and mix them any way you like to create complex sounds, or alternatively you can sequence each of the 2 layers separately on the sequencer. Each of these 2 layers can have its own separate generator, filter, and amp. We'll talk about that later. But some of their parameters like the effects, compressor, and the controls are shared. Each of these 14 voices can use one of several engines or generators as they're called here. The general categories are analog, ACB, which is digital emulation of analog, FM, there's also virtual analog, PCM, and samples. We'll take a listen to these in depth later on, but very briefly, the analog engines are physical analog circuits based on Roland's 808 and 909. Since these are hardwired onto the board, you can only use one of these at a time per kit. There are 16 of these in total, so not all the 808 and 909 sounds, but most of them. Then you've got plenty of digital ACB models based on Roland's classics, literally dozens of those. Then you've got a few FM engines, virtual analog engines, many PCM-based engines. These are internal hard-coded sounds, one-shots based on Roland's classic sounds. PCM sounds don't cost you in terms of sample slots. And then there's the sample generator or sample engine. You can play one of the many bundled sounds. And I didn't count them, but as you can see, there are quite a few of these, including a few loops. Unlike the PCM sounds, which are typically short one-shots, the sample engine can play loops or files that are up to 16 minutes long. Besides the bundled sounds, you can sample directly into TR-1000 through the inputs in the back, resample its own audio, or load up WAV files from your computer through USB or a USB drive and play them back here. The sample engine also supports time stretching and pitch shifting, more on that later as well. And it also has a slicing mode where you can chop samples up. More on this later. There are over 40 gigabytes of internal storage here for samples, which lets you record 71 hours, 42 minutes, and 35 seconds of samples onto the internal drive. As you can see, I've not used much of the internal storage. Of whatever you load up into the internal storage, you can load up into an individual project up to 500 samples at a time. You can store, by the way, 16 projects on the internal drive. A project can hold up to 128 patterns, where each pattern has 8 different sequence variations and 4 different fill variations. So this is a variation, or this is a variation. You can chain variations. Then you've got fills, up to 4 fill patterns in addition to the 8 variations. Each of these variations can be up to 16 steps long. If you want to create songs or sequences that are longer than 128 steps, meaning a chain of 8 variations, then you can load up songs where you can chain variations across multiple different patterns. So for example, here we're in pattern 4-1, playing these variations, doing that once, then moving on to the next part of the song very soon. You can play that 1 or more times as well, moving on to the next pattern and so on. Besides triggering sounds, patterns can also automate pretty much any knob on the track or effect controls. In terms of sound design, each of the 10 tracks or 14 layers you're using has, besides the drum synth controls, which changes based on the model or analog circuit you choose, you've got your choice of either a multi-mode filter with a filter envelope or an EQ in the filter slot. Then the amp slot has either an attack hold envelope or a transient envelope, and these 3 apply to all 14 layers. Then each of the 10 tracks also has its own compressor slot and an instrument or track effects slot, again with your choice of, I think, over 15 different effects here. The tracks or instruments also get a single LFO that can be pointed to one of 3 destinations within the instrument. So this chain of generator, filter, amp, compressor, and effect is called an instrument. These instruments live in a kit, and you can save up to 128 kits per project. Kits also store other settings that apply to all the tracks, namely the 2 send effects, reverb and delay, each with a few type variations, another master digital effect. This is an insert effect, so you route tracks to it, and you've got a choice of a number of master effects as well. So this applies to any track you route it to, and then the same goes for the analog effect. This includes a multi-mode filter and drive, and you can choose to use either one or both. This is analog, by the way, so there's a bit of hiss with a filter, so only use it if you want hiss or if you want to use the analog filter. As you can see from the level controls, there's a mixer here as well, but additional mixer parameters are available here with shift and mixer. This includes panning per track, reverb and delay sends to these 2 effects, gain control, and then routing to the master or analog effects. If you want, you can also bypass them. There's also Sidechain, which we'll talk about later on, and all this, again, is on a per track basis. So you've got reverb sends, delays, and so on, all per track. Besides the per track LFOs, the kit also has 1 LFO. You access that over here, and here too, you've got a bunch of destinations to choose from. All this within the scope of the mixer or the kit. In terms of the overall workflow, you've kind of seen me do it as I went along. You choose a module and then edit that module's parameters using the 6 endless encoders below the screen. Often modules will have more than 1 page, in which case you can move through the pages using these arrow keys. The enter button usually opens up a list, and you go through lists with the scroll encoder. If there are values, you can change them using the value encoder. So for example, if I go into this menu, I can navigate between the tabs like this, go up and down like this, change the value with this. Shift lets you access functions that are written under the buttons. So for example, I can select the generator like this, or this button edits the effects, but with Shift, it edits the mixer. Shift and turning an encoder will make coarse changes. And then once I've selected a parameter, then Shift and increase or decrease will give you fine-tune control over its value. This is particularly useful with parameters that have lists. When relevant for the dual layer tracks, you use these 2 buttons to edit either layer A or layer B. This also works with step sequencing, by the way. So by default, you can add triggers for both layers with a simple key press. But if you wanted, you could trigger either layer B or layer A independently, in which case, hopefully this shows up on the camera, the layer colors are blue and green as opposed to red. Common to all layers, by the way, is a phase flip option and sample-based delay, just in case you want to line things perfectly or avoid phase cancellation. Continuing our tour of the panel, each of the first 4 tracks gets 6 assignable encoders. So that's for the dual layer tracks. The single layer tracks get 3 encoders each. By default, these control tuning, decay, and in the layer tracks, the mix between the 2 layers. And you can assign the 3 control knobs on the dual layers or the 1 control knob on the single layer tracks to whatever you want. You can change these, including the default assignments, using the knob assign function. If a knob is assigned to just 1 parameter, then it'll just say the parameter's name on screen. But if it's assigned to more than 1 parameter, let's say that I also wanted to assign this to color, then in this case, on screen, it'll just say multiple parameters because it's a macro. You can control, by the way, up to 4 parameters at once. So if you want to see what a knob does in this case, you'll just need to enter the knob assign menu. You can also assign ranges here. So for example, if I only wanted to pan from left to center using the macro knob, so that's all it'll control. And if you don't need tuning, then these can be assigned to something completely different. Just choose any one of the instrument destinations you like. So if I wanted this knob, say, to control not generator A, but generator B's color tone, then that's what it will do. Continuing our panel tour, the track names, BD, bass drum, snare drum, low tom, high tom, rim shot, and so on. These are just for identification purposes. You can load any sound you want into any layer or track. For example, eagle-eyed 808 or 909 fans may miss the mid-tom track. So don't worry, there are mid-tom sounds here that you can load into these or any other track. Or, of course, any other sample for that matter. So these knobs are just a small window into the vast number of parameters that the generators have. Same goes for the effects, by the way. These are just the basic parameters. There are more parameters either in the effects menus for the master and analog effect or in the kit edit menu for the reverb and delay. Then the bottom row of 16 buttons have different modes. You can use them to choose different patterns or different pattern banks by holding this, one of 8 banks of 16 patterns each. Then you can use them to sequence the active track in TRX mode. And then they have 4 additional instrument play modes. By default, they'll play the sound in each of the 10 tracks. You can use these for rolls, 1x, 2x, or triplets, or 4x, based on a setting in the menu. But they've got 3 other modes, which you choose by holding instrument play and pressing one of these buttons. 16 velocities is, as you may have guessed, 16 velocity levels for the active track. Then the slice instrument play mode is relevant for sample-based tracks that have sliced samples, in which case these buttons play one of up to 16 slices per track. And then the last mode, snapshot mode, is an interesting one. This lets you play one of 16 parameter snapshots per track. So for example, here we've got 2 snapshots lit up, one playing this light apparently backwards, and one playing it forwards. If you want, you can also use snapshots to automate tuning. I'll fast forward through me doing this. So now I've got my own custom user scale here. And if I wanted, I could play this live into a pattern. So snapshots let you automate any of the panel parameters per track, and you can assign the panel parameters to any parameters that are assignable within that instrument. There's no other way to use these pads as a chromatic or scale keyboard, at least not as of the current firmware. Obviously, it would be nice if they added a way to automatically load a scale or chromatic layout here. These pads, by the way, are not velocity sensitive. Then finally, for the panel tour, we've got a Morph slider, which we need to activate. This is a mega macro that can gradually move any number of panel parameters you like. So let's take a listen to this, for example. That's our basic pattern, and as we gradually morph things, this happens. And you can see what Morph does by entering Morph edit mode and taking a look at the tracks. You'll see that we are changing the control parameter for many of these tracks. Now we've actually got up to 16 morph states. So this is morph 1. This is morph 2 for this pattern. This is morph 3. Each of them doing different things. And if we wanted to, we could create more morph states and mess around with any parameters we wanted. Let's go wild here. So let's see what this does. Okay. So that's morph. Okay, in terms of connectivity, you've got a headphone output up front, and you can cue tracks to the headphones even if their level is down using shift and mute. Then on the back, you've got plenty of 1/4" I/O, unbalanced unfortunately, a full stereo mix output, direct stereo output from the analog effects, individual mono outputs for each of the tracks, which can also be used as trigger outputs, 2 inputs for stereo sampling or to process incoming external audio, analog CV inputs and outputs, an assignable pedal input, MIDI in, out, and through, including DIN sync, and then a USB type A jack to connect USB drives to import or export samples or make firmware updates or backups, and then a USB Type-C jack, both for MIDI and multi-channel audio, 14 channels out and 16 channels in, but at least as of the current firmware, it's not class compliant, so you'll need to install a driver on your computer, and this won't connect to your phone or to another USB-C audio device. Hopefully they'll add a class compliant USB mode so we can sample off phones over USB-C as well. In terms of build, everything here feels solid, except for maybe a bit of wobble on the faders. The entire enclosure is metal. The TR-1000 is a massive beast weighing 5.5 kilos or 12 pounds, and it's got quite a bit of heft and bulk. Finally, to complete the overview, Roland is also making available a computer app that acts kind of like a big screen for the TR-1000, updating in real time to show you instrument parameters, as well as mixer and kit values. It even lets you trim and edit samples, including slices, as well as move samples back and forth. I found this particularly useful when learning the TR-1000 because it gives you a good bird's eye view of everything going on within a layer or instrument or effects. Once you get a hang of things, I think it's faster just to use the onboard tools. That is, of course, why we get hardware and not software, but it is a great way to learn the instrument. Okay, let's dive in and take a listen to the different generator types. I'll start with the analog generators. Now, I don't have an original 808 or 909, but just for fun, so you can get a taste for their sounds, I'll load up the analog generators into track 1, and then a comparable digital one into track 2. So whenever I press this button, it's analog. Whenever I press this button, it's digital. You can see right away that for the analog generators, we've got way fewer parameters, just 3 in this case, but it's applicable to the others as well for the bass drum. Whereas for the 808 bass drum model, the ACB model, we've got way more parameters. So let's start with the analog 808 bass drum. We've got tuning, all the way down and up, tone controls, which is the click, and decay, which goes quite long. As a matter of fact, above a certain number, it just self-oscillates. In a way, 808s don't. You might not hear this on a phone speaker. I asked Roland and they said this is intentional. So you can use it literally like a sustained bass note. So that's the analog bass drum, just for kicks. Let's take a listen to the ACB model. We've got both fine and coarse semitone tuning. substantially more parameters that take it beyond the analog territory. So you won't find an 808 that does this. By the way, the digital 808 doesn't sustain indefinitely like the analog one does. This is the analog 808 snare. We've got tone and a snappy control. I won't go through all the ACB model parameters. Just give you a taste. As you can see, way more parameters here, including multiple models. Let's go back and listen to the low tom. Again, basic analog controls. And let's do the high tom as well. So this is the analog high tom. No additional parameters. There's no analog mid tom instrument per se, but this can go into mid tom ranges either by lowering the high tom or pitching up the low tom. So this is a quick comparison. This is the ACB or digital tom. Again, as expected, more parameters. This actually has either a full model, high, mid, or low tom model. Multiple parameters. Okay, back to analog. There is a rim shot. I won't compare all of these to the ACB models. No parameters here for the rim shot. Hand clap. So this is the analog clap. Let's compare this just for fun to the digital one. And back to analog. Closed hat with no parameters here. Open hat. Decay controls. And let's check out the analog cymbal. Its parameters. 2 over here. And the cowbell, of course. I didn't go through all the digital models because, as you could expect, they too have more parameters. But just for a quick taste, digital hats and open hat, its parameters, crash, cowbell. Tons of parameters here. That's one mad cow. There are digital models of congas, clavs, and maracas. We don't get analog models of those, so we've got overall 10 808 models. Let's check out the 909 models. Here too, there are only 6 of these. So from 11 till 16, presumably because the others are sample-based in the original 909. Anyway, that's the analog 909. Let's just line it up with the ACB 909. So this is our digital ACB kick. Then we've got a snare, 909 snare. Of course, it's got its parameters. Let's listen to the digital ACB one. I'm not sure there's a point in trying to match them, but let's just, for the heck of it, try to get them close. The digital ACB sounds were always pretty good in my opinion. Let's move on and listen to 909 low tom. And again, no mid tom, just a high tom for the analog engine. On the ACB side, they're all lumped into one ACB model, though again with either full or low, mid, high options. As expected, more parameters here. Back to analog, there's an analog rim shot. No parameters here. Let's take a listen to the digital rim shot. Can these be made to sound even closer? Perhaps. And finally, let's listen to the analog clap. Let's load up the digital ACB model as well. So these are the default settings. And let's listen to a bit of its range. And as expected, way more parameters for the digital model. So those are some of the analog models and their digital counterparts. Anyway, moving on to the ACB only models, you've got additional 909 sample-based instruments. And obviously they each have their controls, which I won't go over. If you feel the ACB models aren't gritty enough, then they've got an error parameter, which depending on which one you select, will dirty it up a bit. Then besides 808 and 909s, you've got plenty of other digital models. Again, we won't listen to all of these. A great 606 digital model, I think. A fun CR78 model. And then we can check out the FM models. Let's take a quick listen to these. These aren't based on any particular Roland or other synth, unless you count the TR-800, which also introduced these models. These are great for wild explorations in sound. So that's the kick model 2, with its parameters, FM snare with its parameters. I won't go over all of these. And FM tom, FM clap, FM cymbal, percussion. Then there are a few virtual analog models. Sine wave with few parameters, and triangle with its parameters, square, saw, super saw, and noise, useful for layering. The next category of sounds are all the PCM based sounds. Again, these are internal sample based instruments, all with their own generator sound design controls, namely pitching, 2 octaves up and down, which is different than the sample engine, which can only transpose an octave up and down. And you can reverse these. Control stereo spread, bits, and there's an envelope here as well, with a few envelope modes. And then the last generator we need to cover in depth is the sample engine. So like I mentioned, there are quite a few built-in samples here. Let's just take a look at the basic capabilities of this engine. So once you load up a sample, and samples are in stereo, let's go for this tom. So you've got coarse tuning here, only an octave up and down on the coarse tuning, but the fine tuning substantially opens up the range. We'll get to these in a sec. You can see the sample if you like. Change the start point and end point. I'll get to slicing and time stretching in a bit, and you can change its rate using the rate knob, which also lets you play it in reverse. Then there's also a bit reduction parameter. So those are the basic parameters. Where things get more interesting is when we start to stretch and BPM sync a sample. Now we can load up one of the factory samples or load up our own samples, but let's take a look at the sampling process. You press the sample button to start sampling. You choose your input over here. That can be either the entire mix, specific tracks within a mix, specific individual tracks, or the external input, that's the stereo inputs in the back, or USB audio from a computer. To keep things simple, let's just resample one of the factory patterns. You can choose a length manually, or say let's go for 32 steps. And the trigger can be either a threshold, manual, or let's just go for pattern start in this case. Hit OK, we're ready to sample. I'll press start to start recording. So that's our sample. We can preview it by pressing the copy button. We can make a few destructive edits to the sample, meaning changes that are permanent. For example, normalize it. I could proceed to truncate the sample if I want. There's also an emphasis option, which I believe saturates the highs, but let's go just for write and assign. We can choose a sample category, change the sample name. Let's go for... I won't assign it for now. Let's just hit execute. So if we go to a brand new empty pattern, let's pick a track, say the rimshot track. Then I can go for the other category and look for user samples, and our sample should be here. So that's our sample. We can tune it manually, and by default, it'll slow down as we tune it down and speed up as we tune it up. However, we can turn on Timestretch, and there are a few algorithms here. There's classic, and the way time stretching works is obviously we'll hear more artifacts as we slow a sample down. The percussive algorithm works better for percussive only loops. And the ensemble algorithm works best for melodic samples like this one, obviously within limits. When stretch is on, you can also shift pitch without changing playback time. Now there's a tempo sync option as well. For that, you need to make sure that the auto-detected BPM matches your track. In my case, I know that the original sample is at 130 BPM. So let's go on and turn on tempo sync. In this case, we can no longer set the sample's time because that's set automatically based on the timing of the track. I'll add one trigger here at the beginning of the bar. Let's hit play. In this case, the sample will re-trigger every time it hits this step. I could choose to activate playthrough mode, in which case it will play through, but not re-trigger again. Since the pattern I sampled is 32 steps, I can just chain two variations together, and then it'll loop properly. Anyway, once BPM sync is on, then tempo will match to the project's tempo. Again, automatic time stretch. And a cool option here, if I turn stretch to off, then as I change the tempo, the loop will be pitched down just the right amount to loop properly. Of course, if I wanted to, I could always pitch shift this without changing the tempo. And all the goodies of proper time stretching and pitch shifting. The one limitation of this high quality ensemble mode is that you can only use it twice in a pattern. Then a few more sample-based features. You can choose to loop a sample forward or ping pong. I already talked about playthrough. And then let's take a look at slicing. So you just turn slicing on. Let's go into instrument play slice mode. So by default, you get 16 equal slices. You hit enter to delete slices or enter auto slice mode, in which case you can choose different time divisions, for example, 8. So now we've got only 8 slices. You can auto slice by transient if you like. And there are 3 modes or transient sensitivities. Let's go for hard, see what happens. So that gave us 12 transients. And if we didn't like these, we could edit them. So let's say if I wanted to split this up, I could take the cursor over here, zoom in. That's a bit too much maybe. Let's go for this, hit enter, and add slice. So now we've got 13 slices. So that's pretty much slicing. Like I mentioned, you can also do this within the app. And it syncs pretty nicely. And that's pretty much it for both the sample engine and all the generators. Let's take a brief look at the other things you can do down the instrument sound design chain. The filter slot gives you either an EQ or a filter with a filter envelope, and you need to activate it, and you can filter away with resonance to your heart's content. And there are several filter types: band pass, low pass, and high pass. And there's also a filter envelope. Over here, choose the decay. There's a filter envelope, and the other mode is an EQ with 2 pages of parameters. Anyway, that's the filter. Let's move on to the amp slot, where you've got either an envelope or a transient shaper. These 2 need to be activated to work. So let's turn this on. So this is an attack, hold, and decay envelope. Got curve controls. And if we choose transient, you've got control over, let's go for more depth, the attack and release. So continuing on the instrument chain, we've got effects. There are quite a few to choose from. There's drive with a bunch of parameters, a crusher. I won't go over all these parameters, but filter, we've got that, boost, isolator, saturator, equalizer, frequency shifter, ring mod, spread, stereo spread, chorus, pitch delay. Flanger, phaser, another delay, and a fattener. Once you're done with an instrument, by the way, you can save it, and you can obviously load existing instruments. Let's just go through the list, and you get several hundred instruments. The benefit of instrument presets, as opposed to loading up a generator, is that it loads up the specific generator settings as well as filter, amp, effect settings, and knob assignments. So for example, for this instrument, we've got additional controls, whereas if we loaded up the 606 generator, in this case, into an empty track, then the control knobs won't be assigned to anything. Okay, so everything we talked about now lives within the scope of an instrument: the generator, filter, amp, effects, the compressor, and LFO, which I mentioned earlier, which goes to up to 3 destinations. Then besides that, globally, we've got 4 effects slots, reverb and delay sends and master and analog inserts. You send audio to the sends in the mixer. So for example, send to the reverb or send to the delay. You edit the reverb and delay in the kit parameters. There are a few reverb types, which you can choose by hitting enter here. So there's an ambi, short, and they gradually get longer. Obviously each have their own level and time parameters for the reverb here, as well as some other parameters on 2 pages. Anyway, those are the reverbs. Let's take a listen to the delays. You've got time and feedback controls here. And additional controls in the kit controls. There are quite a lot of pages here on the kit controls. Anyway, these 3 pages are delay controls. You can tempo sync the delay. There's filtering or dampening. You can send it to the reverb. And there are a few delay types. Pan, ping pong, echo, tape style delay, which I guess would work better with sync off. There's our time and feedback. And then the last delay type is pitch. So that will, as you might guess, pitch the delay up or down. So that is the pitch delay. So those were the reverb and delay sends. Let's take a listen to the master effects, and we edit them using Shift and Edit. Let's see what we've got to choose from here. This is our clean pattern. There's a crusher, filter and drive on the digital side. DJ FX looper. Isolator. Scatter. On and off might be useful here. Flanger. With its parameters, phaser, sideband filter, compressor, fed compressor, dimension delay, I think, transient, transient 2, noise, for transitions. So those were the master effects. Let's take a listen to the analog effects. We've got filter drive, filter or drive. Let's just listen to the drive standalone. Drive. Let's listen to the filter on its own. And you've got 2 pages here. Gain into the filter, out of the filter, and filter type. We've got, of course, cutoff control here as well. And then there's filter with drive. Okay, let's move on and talk about sidechain. So this is a pretty busy pattern, but if we lower things down a bit, you'll hear that this kick is ducking or sidechained to the level of this bass. If I were to go into TR-Rec and remove these hits, the bass would just ring out. But this is what causes the ducking of this sound. So how does this work? You choose the sidechain source in the kit menu, all the way on pages 11 and 12. So in this case, we chose bass drum A and B. That's this track over here. We've got a master depth control if we want here, but it won't impact tracks unless we sidechain them in the mixer. So if I head out to the mixer here and go to this track, you'll see I've got sidechain depth all the way up. If I turn it down, you won't hear any ducking. But as we increase this, you can hear this track duck. And again, this happens regardless of whether the level of this track is up or down, because it happens based on its triggers. So that's sound design on the TR-1000. Let's talk about sequencing. You can sequence a song by simply adding steps in TR-Rec mode, or playing them live in instrument rec mode. So you can practice if you want in instrument play mode and record when you're ready. Recording, by the way, can be quantized or unquantized. Quantize on, quantize off. Like I mentioned, you can load up two sounds and create either layers or trigger them separately on each of the first 4 tracks. So right now I've got the 909 bass drum here and nothing in layer B, but I could easily load up any other sound. Let's go for, say, this. So I've either created this wonderful dual layer sound. So rather than triggering them both, I could easily go into layer A, trigger that here, the kick, then add maybe these guys here, or add both here. So layers are sequenceable separately. Automation is pretty straightforward as well. So let's say add a bunch of hats here, and let's say that I wanted to automate their decay. We need to make sure we've activated playback of automation and then hit record. And I've automated that. Automation is for any of the knob controlled parameters, and you can also step sequence that just by holding a step and then either editing whatever parameters that are automatable on that step. So in this case, I've automated decay, and you can see that here. Besides the 3 or 6 parameters, you can also edit additional per step parameters. Parameters that are available here are velocity, probabilities, micro timing, playing the trigger every few cycles, say on the 3rd of every 5 cycles, and substeps, ratchets. Slices are automated in the spot which is empty now because this isn't a sliced sample. Anyway, you can automate substeps or ratchets on a per step basis, or just use the sub button, choose a substep, and then drop substeps onto the pattern. You can see that on top here. So now these will have ratchets as well. Let's add some claps to this pattern. You can change a pattern length with last step. So this will change the length of the entire pattern. You can also set a first step with shift. Or you can change the length of a specific track by holding last, choosing the track, and making, say, just the clap track 7 steps for various polymetric effects. You can't change the running speed of individual tracks, but if you hit shift plus the track, you've got a few options like various playback directions. You can rotate the steps and change the swing amount. There is swing, by the way, over here. Then a few more sequencing shortcuts. There is an accent that you can apply per step with an accent depth. And if you want to sequence ghost notes, so let's say add snares here, and hit shift and a step, it'll enter ghost notes. And then a few more performance functions. There's mute, which will quickly mute tracks. And there is a step loop function. Which is a fun performance option. And then one more final fun performance trick. Let's say that you royally mess up a track by changing one parameter too many. You can always reload, hit reload here, and then say reload an instrument or the entire kit, or if you've messed up the sequence, or just one variation in this case, so we won't immediately hear it. Hit reload and pattern select, and things should go back to normal. Okay, let's talk about pros and cons for the TR-1000. I'll start with the cons. The most obvious one are, while I don't know the exact price at the time you're viewing this, cheap it ain't. Certainly not compared to the TR-8S or other drum machines. Also, the TR-1000 isn't small. It's about 6 centimeters or 2 inches wider and deeper than the TR-8S, and certainly significantly bulkier too, so you'll need to make space for it. One more thing, while it does have a lot of knobs, it's got even more parameters for the various synth engines. So while you can map these to macros or to control different parameters, I did find myself ultimately consulting this screen much more when changing parameter values just to get to different parameters quicker. But overall, once you set things up the way you like, this is extremely hands-on. And then remember, this can't do it all. This is a drum machine. The tracks are monophonic. And if you want to sequence melodies, you'll have to automate either the snapshots or automate tuning on a step-by-step basis like I showed you earlier. So those are the cons. On the pros side, this is probably the most performance-oriented, versatile and feature-rich drum machine I've ever used. It's got a good taste of Roland's classic analog voices and plenty of digital ACB synth models, drum synth models, FM, virtual analog, sample-based engines. It supports slicing, time stretching, and pitch shifting within the 2-track limit for the advanced melodic stretching algorithm, but still plenty of sample mangling here. It's got plenty of effects to select from, both on the track level and on the global kit level. Besides the generators, you've got plenty of sound design options to continue shaping your sound with. If you're ticking feature boxes, you might find more, say, on an MPC or machine, but those are much less hands-on than the TR-1000, so if it's within your budget, it's certainly a fun addition to your setup to take care of the rhythmic side of things. Beside that, I've got a few wishlist requests. It would be nice to have a chromatic or 2-octave scale mode using these buttons as a new instrument play mode. It would be awesome to have a lazy chop mode in addition to the existing sample slicing functions, and it would also be useful to have tracks that can run at different speeds relative to each other, not just different directions or different track lengths. And then my final feature request can't be done in a firmware update. I'm sure the analog components add to the price of the TR-1000, and they're certainly fun to have if you can afford it. And perhaps now a lot of people that have been bugging Roland to go analog got what they wanted. But I think it would be great if Roland came out with a less expensive digital-only version of this, or an upgraded TR-8S with this screen and sample mangling capabilities. So that's it for the TR-1000. Stay tuned for the factory patterns, and if you'd like a whole bunch of electronic music ideas, tips, and tricks, check out my ever-expanding book on Patreon. Hit like if this was useful, ring the YouTube bell below to make sure you don't miss the next one. Thanks for watching.
you.